What is up, harvesters? Welcome back to Hobby Harvest. So it's been a little while since I put a video out. It's been the middle of hunting season, the middle of the rut, the middle of gun season, the middle of the busiest time of year in the deer woods, and so I haven't been putting videos out, but I'm back now. I'm gonna keep up with my normal schedule of putting a video out every week, so stay tuned. I wanna start shifting towards talking about a lot of like habitat improvements and planning so that we can prepare and get started going into next hunting season already, because that is the best thing to do this time of year, is prepare for next year. So what I want to talk to you guys in this video about though is what bucks do in a given day during the rut. How aggressive are they? How territorial are they? You know, there was some chatter on social media recently about some guys talking about bucks being super territorial, and there's a lot of like misinformation out there. Maybe there were people just trolling out there. Maybe there's just some guys just aren't the best, you know, source of information out there. I'm gonna tell you how bucks actually behave year round, but especially during the rut. So bucks are not territorial. That might come off as a surprise to a lot of you, because they kind of are, but like not in the sense that a lot of guys think they are. So, you know, I'll pick on my former self here. When I was younger, I used to think, you know, the biggest buck in the woods is like the biggest lion in Africa. He has his pride of lions. He has all these lionesses. All of those cubs are his. So, you know, that big buck in the woods, it's almost like all those bucks get together and they sign up on the sign up sheet and they all fight it out to see who the biggest, baddest buck in the woods is. And then whoever wins gets to go breed all the does. That is not at all what happens in the deer woods. So what actually happens in the deer woods is bucks will fight, but I don't like calling it fight. I like calling it sparring, because that's really what they're doing. Now, I just got done with my 25th consecutive gun deer season. And in those 25 seasons, I've put a ton of hours in the stand. I've watched a ton of deer in their natural habitat, seeing what they do when they're out, when they're not spooked, when they're just behaving naturally. I've also been running trail cameras since they were like those big black boxes with like 8D batteries in them way back in the day. I have currently run a ton of trail cameras, and all my ones now are 4K Ultra HD. They're all set to video because I use those trail cam videos for B-roll here on this channel. So I am running a ton of trail cameras. They're all set to video. I get a good glimpse of the deer woods 9 months out of the year. I do pull those cameras about the time the bucks all shed their antlers, and then I put the cameras back out at about the time the does are dropping their fawns. So they do get about 3 months-ish out of the woods, where I bring them in, I clean them up, I dry them out. You know, they've been out in the weather for 9 months. I get them all up and running, fresh batteries, fresh cards, ready to go again for the season. But in doing all of that, I get a very good glimpse of bucks in the woods, in their natural habitat. And so one thing I'll tell you of why bucks aren't territorial is because 95% of the year, bucks are in bachelor groups. Bucks run together as buds 95% of the year. Now, they do kind of group up by their age class. So you'll notice that like the mature bucks will be running together, and that those like intermediate age bucks are running together, and then those younger bucks are running together. So, you know, you might see your nubs and your 1.5 years running together, but those nubs may also go back to mom. She may not have fully kicked them away after she went into estrus that first time, but you can bet she's definitely kicking that nub buck away before those fawns drop in the spring, and he'll be on his own. So a lot of times you will see those nub bucks both running with the doe family group still, but also running with those 1.5 year old buck groups also. And now that isn't to say you don't get a 2.5-year-old runs with those 1.5-year-olds every once in a while, but then you're going to have those like 2.5-year-old groups, those 3.5-year-old groups. And now as you get older, there's fewer of those older bucks around. So you may only start to see one 4.5-year-old, one 5.5-year-old, or there might just be like 2 of them together, just because there's not that many of them anymore, but also because those big old bucks do not like to be around the noise of the other deer. So we're typically setting up cameras and whatever where we expect to see deer. Well, if we're seeing all of the does and fawns and all of those young bucks, it's going to be a lot less likely to see those mature bucks because they're avoiding those other deer. Not impossible, you'll still see them pass through every once in a while, but they don't like to hang with those other groups of deer. So, okay, let's get into the rut. Let's get into that other 5% or less time of year. What do bucks do that time of year? Well, they don't fight constantly. I think some guys think that bucks are just like all hormonal and they're just out there in a rage, like destroying anything that moves. And like, yeah, they can have their bad days. They can have their bad moments where they're just out to destroy something beautiful. There's a Fight Club reference for you. And they're out there just like wrecking anything, and they want to fight with anything that they can. But the majority of the time, they're still just running either solo or with their buds. So I'll actually show you guys a video right now. We were actually able to get one of these bucks this year during gun deer season. An older guy who hunts with us hadn't shot a buck in a few years, so I let him sit in one of my good stands, and he was actually able to harvest one of these guys right off of this very mock scrape right here. But you can see how these two kind of came in together, and then they kind of just stand around, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, let's spar a little bit, let's have a little bit of fun. And then they go back to standing around, they take their turn on the mock scrape. Like, this is not the aggressive fighting behavior that many people have like come to believe exists in the deer woods. This is what these two guys look like. Now, these two were on my property constantly. I knew we were gonna have a great shot at one of these, and we did. And so I've seen these guys from velvet on. They've always been running together. There's a good chance that they're probably brothers, or they've just been running together since they were young. So even during the rut, they were running together. They stuck together, and they aren't like out to kill each other. Like, you guys know that bucks have very sharp antlers. Like, if they wanted to do some damage with those, they could, but we're not seeing that in the woods. You know, they're not running up and blindsiding another buck with their head down and puncturing holes in him. They kind of walk up, look face to face, they both lower their head, and they just kind of like wrestle with each other. There's no like jabbing or anything. You can see like in some of these videos I have, they get kind of close to each other's eyes, and they don't really even puncture into the eye sockets or anything. You know, accidents can happen. One buck might be a little bit more aggressive than another. And that's another thing I want to get to. So like, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but like, humans have 16 different personality types. So all humans aren't the same. What would make us believe that all deer are the same, right? So I'm not saying that deer have 16 different personality types. They're nowhere near as intelligent and as complex psychologically as humans are, but I think it's safe to assume that there's not just one deer personality type out there. I think all of us who have spent enough time in the woods have seen deer behave differently from other deer, right? So it is possible you're going to have that one bully buck who's out there just trying to wreck everything, or maybe he's just having a bad day. He's extra hormonal that day. He's got a lot of testosterone pumping through his veins that day. Maybe he's on a hot doe, something of that nature, who knows? But it's safe to assume that just because you see one aggressive buck does not mean all bucks are aggressive. From what I have seen from my personal experience, the majority of them are not. They just spar, they just play around a little bit, and that is it. Now, I want to get back to how I started, where I said, you know, when I was younger, I believed, you know, the bucks all get together, they fight that biggest buck, the strongest one, the one that's got the best genes, he gets to breed all the does. That is not true. I have personally watched 3 different bucks take turns on the same doe. They were all following her. The first buck caught up to her. He bred her. He was standing there kind of, you know, getting his head back together. The second buck walks up and breeds her. He's just kind of standing there in a daze. And then the third buck walks up and breeds her. So who's to say which one's going to be the father of those fawns? There's no way of knowing that. But in no way, shape, or form were those 3 bucks at all worried about like fighting each other to see who was the dominant buck. All 3 of them just took their turn with her, and that was the end of it, right? So every buck in the woods breeds every doe in the woods, and I know that's not 100% true, but it's a lot more accurate than one buck breeds all the does, right? So multiple bucks are breeding multiple does out there. They're all having their turn. That doe is definitely going to get bred. I mean, how many times do we ever see a doe that doesn't have fawns? And if it is, it's probably because she was a fawn the year before and didn't get bred in the second rut, which happens this time of year at the beginning of December. So I actually have a video that I'll dig that up and show it to you guys too. I have a video from last year of a big 8-pointer chasing a doe fawn. It's actually pretty interesting to watch, but those doe fawns don't all get bred. And so when you see a doe next year that doesn't have fawns with her, she is not a barren doe. She is a 1.5-year-old doe who just didn't get bred last year, or she did get bred, but the winter was so harsh that she lost her fawns just to survive the winter. So don't shoot those does thinking they're barren does. There's no such thing as a barren doe in the woods. It's would be extremely rare if they are. We've had old does that we were able to identify them because they actually had like weird like white markings on their legs where they were almost like wearing socks. So we had a few does that we were actually able to track for a few years that way to see how old they actually were. And they had fawns with them until they died and didn't show up on our cameras anymore. So the barren doe isn't something I really believe in. I would say 9 times out of 10, if not 19 times out of 20, if you see a doe without fawns, it's either a predator got her fawns when they were younger, or she's that 1.5-year-old doe that just didn't carry fawns through the winter or wasn't bred during the second rut. So that's just something I want you guys to consider. You know, there's this idea of this big aggressive buck out there, you know, holding down his territory. That is not how bucks behave. Does are the bullies in the woods. Those big mature does are the ones that rule the roost out here. They're the ones that claim territory. You will see that a doe will kick a buck off a mock scrape. I got video of that too. I'll show it to you if I can dig it up. That those does will bully those bucks around because those does will always claim the best habitat in the spring for their fawning ground. So the bucks want absolutely nothing to do with them. Those bucks are coming into velvet, and those bucks don't want to be in thick cover anyway because they're in velvet. So those bucks are going to go off somewhere else, and they're going to grow their antlers all summer long. They're going to hang out in those bachelor groups. Then they get hard horned and they're going to start wanting to relate to that quality habitat that those does have been living in because it's got good food and it's got good cover. And now that they're hard horned, they can go in there. But you'll watch those does like beat on those bucks and push them out of those areas right up until the rut happens. Then the bucks are chasing the does. But as soon as the rut's done, all the deer will sort of herd up, but the bucks are going to herd up in those bachelor groups, and the does are going to stay in those doe family groups, but the deer as a whole will move to wherever the food is. So there's less food in the winter. They can't be as picky to just separate and stay away from each other, so they will put up with a lot more social pressure in the winter on a food source because they need the calories, they need the food, and they're not as eager to be fighting with each other when they're all just trying to survive and make it through the winter anyway. But that's how you guys got to think of it. That doe is the one who's claiming territory out there. Those bucks do not have territory. Yeah, they'll have their scrape lines, they'll have their rub lines. They're going to go out there, they're going to do the buck things, they're going to do those rut things. But when they fight, they're not fighting, they're just sparring. They're just kind of like two dogs or two cats kind of wrestling or playing together. I don't know that they do it to establish dominance because, like I said, I've watched multiple bucks breed the same doe. So the winner doesn't necessarily get the spoils because all of them got the spoils. And so if you guys feel like you got some value out of this, like I said, I'm going to be putting out some more videos now more consistently now that I'm not so focused on the deer season, although I did not film my bow tag yet. So I am waiting on one big boy, and if I don't see him, I'm not going to film my bow tag this year, but I'm going to be very selective on when I hunt him. He used to be a midnight buck. I have now got him to move to a just about an hour after dark buck, and I am hoping I can catch him slipping up one of these times right before dark, especially as we head further into winter, and he's going to need to hit up this food plot now that most of the ag has been harvested in the area. So wish me luck. I hope you guys had a great season, or I wish you luck going further into the season. You know, here in Wisconsin, we got a few weeks left of bow season. Like I said, I'm only going after him now that I have meat in the freezer, and if I don't get him, I don't get him. I'll be happy to see what he turns into next year. He did survive gun season around here, so I was happy to see that. But hope you guys enjoyed the content. I got more on the way. I'll catch you guys in the next one.